Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. Yep, it's Friday. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to the show. If you haven't subscribed, and I'll ask yourself, why haven't you done so now? Do so right now. Just click subscribe, hit the bell notifications. You'll get it if you're watching us on YouTube. If you're listening and you haven't subscribed, shame on you because you're not getting notifications. You don't know when a new episode becomes live. So you can do that. Also go to our website, cyberhubpodcast.com. You can find all of our podcasts, including CISO Talk, our daily practitioner brief, Monday through Thursday. And this is how we wrap up every week. A very, very interesting mind. Someone that's coming to us from across the ocean. One of the most interesting people I've had the opportunity to speak with, Javvad Malik. And Malik, for those who don't know, in Arabic means the ruler. And so Javvad Malik, security awareness advocate at KnowBe4. Welcome to the show, buddy.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
So I will say this, folks. Javvad is with our friends over at KnowBe4. Make sure you check them out, knowbe4.com. The link is also below. You can find out some really cool free stuff there that they've got. I think they're one of the only vendors I know on the planet that pretty much gives a lot of stuff for free. No questions asked. It's kind of pretty neat. But we won't get into that. So Javvad and I got together on this thing, and we're like, what would be really cool for us to do? And we're going to go from the echo chamber of security. That's what we're going to talk about today. The echo chamber of security, meaning when security people speak to other security people, we're all looking for confirmation bias. And there's a little bit of a challenge with that, right, Javvad?
Absolutely. Absolutely, there is. I think one of the biggest challenges is that, where do we get our information from? And a lot of it is either your personal experience or so it's personal experience or it's anecdotal experience. Like me and you can chat about something and we can agree that, this is definitely is good or bad. Or then we look for industry research or some research papers that are published. And there's a distinct lack of reliable sources that we can go to for the security industry. And we've spoken about this before, offline before we were recording, but you've only got two real options. There's the analyst firms that produce research, like your Gartners, Forresters, 451, and those kinds of companies, which is great, but they're often paid for subscriptions, and they're not easy to get hold of like that. Or the second one is you can get lots of research that vendors put out, but the problem with a lot of that is that it's quite heavily biased towards whatever problem the vendor is trying to solve. So if you're for example, firewall vendor, you're not necessarily going to do some research and publish some stats on what the state of endpoint security is.
Right.
It's always going to be, hey, the big conclusion we've come to is 98.3% of all attacks are because of bad firewalls. So buy our firewall. And they really, really skew our perspectives, because you hear that so many times, all these conflicting messages saying that 80% of your attacks are from this or this or this or this or this. And everyone ends up confused. And I think we end up just then finding our own echo chambers and just reinforcing what we want to hear and what's relevant to our experience.
That's so true. It's fascinating for me to hear you say that. Not only is it fascinating, it's that confirmation bias of research, right? So I do the practitioner brief every Monday through Thursday, and I started doing it because I started realizing that I would speak to my peers and I'd ask them about different things, and we'd always fall into a clickbait. You'd see this big research that says 79% of all attacks come through your VPN, and you're like, whoa, my VPN? Wait a minute. And then you read through it and you go, I don't understand where you got that headline from. I don't understand why this research is out here. And when I started the podcast, only then did I start to realize that it's all pay to play. And a lot of this stuff is pay to play. And I'm going to say it out loud for everyone to hear. It's pay to play. And while I understand the need for marketing and publicity and for companies to be successful, at the same time, there's a level where professionals look at what you're doing and go, well, if this is what you're putting out, do I really want to do business with you? Because now I doubt the integrity of what you're doing. And I question the integrity of what you're talking about. And I don't know that companies weigh that. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think enough companies weigh that, and even the ones that do, um, there aren't really many options outside of that. I mean, that's the problem. If you're a buyer and you're going out and you're looking at, you pick a dozen or so vendors in a particular space, most of them will follow the same sort of structure. So they'll say, "Hey, we interviewed 200 people at a conference. We didn't really qualify who they were, whether they were actually security practitioners or whether they were the marketing people just looking for some free swag in exchange for completing this questionnaire." And 80% of them said they're hiring. So therefore, if you extrapolate those 200 people at that one conference, 80% said they're hiring. That means 80% of all organizations around the globe are hiring. So therefore, there's a shortage of 7 billion security professionals.
Yeah, it's the workforce shortage has been one of the biggest hoaxes in our industry. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but I got to tell you, man, since COVID, I'm seeing more people looking for jobs. I've shared more CVs. I've gotten more messages on LinkedIn or even through my website of people saying, "Hey, James, I'm looking for work. Just getting started in security. I'm looking to get started in security, or I've been doing this and I've been a mid manager for a while." And people that are looking to boost their credentials to get jobs because they're not finding the right roles. Now, there's a shortage in one aspect of security: management level roles. We have so many analysts, so many pen testers, right? We don't have enough people qualified to manage those teams. But again, you can take someone from IT and cross-train him on security because he's already got the networking thing down, and really just enhance his security by sending him to do a CISSP or a cloud security cert, or even just take a SANS course, and they'll be ready to go. They don't need to go to a 4-year university, a 2-year university to touch up on security. They can just do a crash course for 5-6 days, take the test, get the cert, move on with their lives, and be just capable. I think those are like clickbait headlines that just are designed to create a level of, I don't know who it helps. I don't know who those headlines help.
Well, it helps any organization looking to boost their certifications primarily, or educational institutes, or I suppose readership in the online publications as well, because clickbait drives traffic.
It does, and we see that across so many different places. It's extremely troublesome. When we look at the echo chamber of security, I think one of the aspects that we constantly talk about is, I made a commitment to myself last year. And some people who listen to the podcast before I rebranded it know this. I said I will no longer speak at cybersecurity events. There's nothing I can tell you that would be groundbreaking. Because groundbreaking in security today is only how technology is being utilized in the effects of cyber. More security people need to speak to non-security people, because that's the only way we get out of the echo chamber. That's how we get the kind of questions that make us rethink the way we do security and kind of change us from a culture, a department of no, to a department of yes, we can. Right? So let's talk
Correct.
a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about the whole idea of this echo chamber and going from a no to a yes kind of environment.
Yeah, so this is something that I've been really interested in for many years, because I mean, I used to work as a practitioner, and back in the early 2000s, the security team pretty much was the department of no, at least where I was in the bank that I was. People would come to us saying, "Hey, we want to do this," and it would be like, "No, that's not in the policy." And they're like, "Well, what can I do?" And the best we could offer them is go to the business owner and get an exception to policy raised. And if they accept it, then it will come through to the security board, and maybe we'll accept it as well. So I think that there has been improvement since those days, but I think still there's not enough. And again, what happens is, say for example, people are working from home these days and they need an online sharing platform to securely share documents. So what we'll do as security practitioners, we'll go to within our echo chamber and say, what's the best way to securely share information? And people will say, use Signal, use Tor, use this thing, or have it set up in this way. And because we're just talking amongst ourselves, what us as professionals, it's natural what we do. There's that kind of like subtle game of one-upmanship that goes on, like, and well, I employ 2FA, and someone else was like, just 2FA, that's so last year. Let's put in 3 other layers of controls in there. And then we say, you only use multi-factor authentication. I also have like, a VPN that's securely binded to this and what have you. So then we go back to the business, and when the business comes to us and say, hey, we're working from home, we need to securely share documents. It's like, well, here's a solution that we've created for you. And what we're not doing, we're not actually listening to what the ask is. The ask isn't, I want to share documents securely. They're like, the solution you've provided is unusable. It's unworkable for me. I don't want to spend 5 minutes logging on and getting my authenticator token and plugging that in and connecting to the VPN just so I can share some files with my colleagues. I want you to give me something easy and workable to use that is just secure enough. A lot of times that's all we need. It's just something that's secure enough for the needs. So we need to move the conversation away from just simply saying no to no but, or no and you can do this.
Or we can say yes, let me check it for you and I'll get back to you. Let me do this and I can do that. A lot of times that's been the biggest, I think that's been the biggest thing that I've learned is I never say no. And in fact, people that work on my team know that the word no doesn't exist in our vocabulary. It doesn't exist within any document we write. There's no no's that I want to see anywhere. I don't want to see a no. I don't want to say no. I don't want to see a no. I want to see a yes, but. Yes, we can do this, but we need all these different things in order to do it because the risks to the business are this much, and this is where we're concerned for it. And when you do it that way, you tend to have, you tend to get a little bit more buy-in because the business side understands that. But a lot of times when people say, no, that's not policy, like you said earlier, or no, we can't do this, or no, we can't do that, you end up in a position where people are going like, I'm not even going to talk to these guys. And then you end up in unknown cloud environments that are getting put up. You end up with databases being unsecured. You end up with apps that get put up for testing, but then never get taken down, right? And then all of a sudden, you get a tweet from a messenger, you get a tweet from a researcher that goes, hey, so-and-so, I found all of this stuff on the cloud and I'm going to give you 2 weeks to take it all down before I report it and post it. And then you're like, no. And you're struggling at that point, but you're struggling because you became a no, right?
Exactly. 100%. That's exactly how it pans out. In my experience and also people who I've spoken to, it's just so easy just to sit back and you don't even realize when you've just been cut out of the loop until Krebs comes knocking at your door and saying, hey, we found this or what have you. So the other aspect I think is it's okay to let go of some control and let people who are experts in certain aspects take charge of that. Just because you're the CISO or you're the security consultant doesn't mean you have to be involved in every single aspect of it, as long as you're achieving the desired outcomes. So an example is I was speaking to a friend of mine who used to be the CISO at HMRC over here, Ed Tucker, and he said that, don't write your policies or yourself, or what he said that they write them, but then they give them to actual people who are writers and say, take out all the technical jargon from these documents. So they're under no impression that they're the best writers in the world, because we often are used to writing amongst ourselves, and so we'll use terminology that is alien to other people. So they'll give it to a proper writer who speaks proper the Queen's English.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they'll translate it and they'll strip out anything that's technical. So it just becomes a much more cleaner interface.
I hired a security researcher. I got to tell you a really funny story here. People are going to love this. I won't say his name because I don't want to embarrass him. He doesn't do this anymore. But this person would probably spend a good part of his time on Twitter. And so when he would write emails, his emails were like tweets. 140 to 280 characters. Shortcuts to words spelled, with a K or an F instead of a PH, you name it. Just really funny stuff. And so I brought him in to have a conversation, and I was like, listen, buddy, you're a great security researcher, but we really have to work on the way you write emails. I go, email is not Twitter. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you do on Twitter. What you do on Twitter is what you do on Twitter. But I don't want to get tweets in my emails. I don't want to have to go to the Urban Dictionary to translate words. Right? So please, no, don't tweet at me in email anymore. And it was so funny because he just looked at me for a second and then he went, huh. He goes, you think that's why I've been fired 3 times in like the last year? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's the reason for it. Now, I knew this guy was problematic, but he's a brilliant security researcher. And most brilliant security people aren't always the easiest to get along with. But if you're able to really kind of hone in and not judge them, but rather develop them, give them some logic behind the stuff, you typically are able to earn their loyalty. They appreciate you. Don't belittle someone because they're different. Don't belittle difference, accept difference, and then work on ways to bridge that difference while maintaining that person's self-respect. I think that's where a lot of leaders fail. They want to come and say, I'm the boss, you do it my way because look at the title on my desk. Look at the title on my card. And you're just like, calm down, buddy.
Yeah.
Right? Calm down.
Absolutely.
The world's like the London Eye. Sometimes you're on top, sometimes you're on the bottom. But you're constantly rotating, right? You don't always get the perfect view on top. You're not always there for very long. I've always compared that. I got a video of me on the London Eye. And you're on the London Eye, I think, for about 10 minutes. I think 12 minutes or so. It's not very long.
You spend longer in the queue.
You do spend longer in the queue, unless you spend money on the VIP pass. Then you get to skip the entire queue. And then people look at you like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
The guy who would rather pay 10 extra pounds and skip this queue than stand in this queue for another 45 minutes to go on a 12-minute ride. Right?
That's right.
And so you kind of, you jump on it. And I did the whole video. And I show that video a lot of times to a lot of people when they get, before they get promoted. I go, listen, your time on top's limited. It's very similar to how the London Eye or any Ferris wheel works, right? For those who don't know, the London Eye is the big Ferris wheel that's right on the side of the Thames. So you can, from there, once you get to the very top portion of it, the very top, area, you see just amazing views of London, and the outskirts of London, and so it's a really beautiful thing. If you ever go to London, I think people have to do the London Eye.
Yeah. Well, I'll just also add that if you go to the O2 Center, Millennium Dome, which is further east, there's a cable car that crosses the Thames. And it is cheap because you can go, if you've got an Oyster card, a travel card, you can just use that and get on it. That lasts longer and you get almost just as nice as view. You get quite elevated, you go over the river. And okay, the city is a bit further away, but it's a spectacular view. So it's the poor man's London Eye, but you get a very different perspective from there as well.
There's nothing wrong with the poor man's London Eye, Mr. Malik. I know you rule over England, but still at the same time, I like the unknown places. I mean, one of the things whenever I'd be in London is I always took the tube, and I hated going in taxis or anything like that. Like the only time I'd ever jump in a taxi is if it was raining and stormy, and you know that there are line delays on the tube, because apparently when it rains, the tube gets delayed. Don't know the logic, but whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. But just going back to, you just reminded me also when you're telling me about your colleague who used to write emails as tweets. I used to work with a guy, and all of his emails. This is going back a long time. His from his desktop, his signature would be sent from my Blackberry, and I'd be like, "Why do you have that on your desktop?" He goes, "That way I don't have to proof check my emails. It just goes, and if there's spelling mistakes or something, people are like, he wrote it on the train or whatever."
Let's dig a little bit deeper. You've brought up a few very, very good points, and I kind of want to break this podcast down a little bit. And I really want to dig deep on the idea of incomplete surveys and research. You brought up a really, really good point, which is a lot of times in trade shows, people will offer surveys or they'll send a survey to clients or their database, and they'll say, all right, we sent it to 5,000 people in our database, 1,000 answered, here's our control group, without really validating that control group. And so we end up with, as you said early on in the podcast, these taking statistics and pivoting them. Now, for the sake of full disclosure, security isn't the only industry that does this. I think every single industry does this in every single spectrum across the globe. So we're not just saying security people do this, and for security people who are in marketing or research, we're not finger pointing you guys out, but we do want to challenge you to maybe think differently about your control groups and about your research and surveys. Is that fair?
That's fair. That's fair. I think it's absolutely fair. I think one of the best examples in our industry is the Verizon data breach report,
right? Because
they are so clear with their method. Excuse me.
Have a drink of water, Mr. Malik.
Yeah, I should have had some. I don't have. But they're so clear with their methodology, their sample, and actually, when you read it, what I really love about it is there's a graph that says something, and the paragraphs that accompany it are almost always saying why the graph could be wrong or the limitations of the data. And that's what makes it such a fascinating read for me, that they openly acknowledge these are the limitations, but this is what the information we have, and here it is. And then you can go off and make your own interpretations, as opposed to others when you read them and you're like, this is the ultimate truth. This is the gospel. So there's a lot to be said. I think if even if they just started off their reports by saying, this is our methodology, and we know this isn't perfect because of these restrictions, but bearing that in mind, read the rest of the report. Even that would add credibility in my eyes, because they're at least acknowledging what the limitations of this whatever it was, whether it's a survey, whether it's interviews, whether it's data from systems, whatever they've used to compile that data and research it, they need to lay it out and be transparent.
So, yes, they need to lay out the data. They need to lay out the control group. I think predominantly, it was very interesting for me. I saw a report that was written, and it was research about small, medium-sized businesses, and it was written by a vendor. And I read the research paper because it got sent to me by their PR company. Hey, would you like to interview so-and-so on your podcast? This is the research. And so the research topic seemed very interesting. I said, well, maybe let me read more into this. So I read it, and I replied to the email a few days later with 13 different questions. And I said, if you can answer these 13 questions satisfactory, I'll do a free interview. But if you can't, you're paying me. Because I just wasted 4 hours of my life reading your report and dissecting it. And these are 13 points where 13 questions I have that don't make sense. Because the major outline of the report was that small and mid-sized businesses don't really account for cybersecurity. So I said, well, one, what's your definition of small to mid-sized business? Mm-hmm. Number two, number one, then why are you comparing small and mid-sized businesses in the same category? After all, typically a mid-sized business has a CTO and has an IT person full-time, whereas in a small business might use an MSP or an MSSP for their IT purposes. So how do you separate the two? Right? And then when you look at your control groups, so what industries are they in? Did you talk to the ice cream shop that sells, frozen ice cream around the corner and determine that they don't have enough security because they have free Wi-Fi in their business with no password? So that makes them unsecure? Or did you speak to a small accounting firm in an office building? There's huge differences. Or did you speak to a small manufacturer or what is it? Like, those are critical questions in the report that aren't being answered, but the report reaches all these different conclusions, right? And like you said, it's almost like it's the gospel. And I never heard back from the PR lady.
Yeah.
Like,
that's the thing. When I was at 451 Research, I was an analyst there, and Wendy Nather was my manager at the time. I don't know if you know Wendy. If you don't know her, she's absolutely amazing. But I remember being there, and I was like, well, you have to write opinions mixed in with the facts, and how do I do something? I'm not sure whether I was new and I didn't have a wealth of the industry breadth of knowledge there. And she was like, well, write whatever you want as long as it's defensible. So that if someone comes to you and says, how did you arrive at this conclusion? You can say to them, I started with this and then I've done this, and I came to this conclusion. It says, that shows that, you haven't just pulled something out of a hat. But secondly, maybe they can then say, you missed out this. So, and then that allows you to then go back and revise it and say, well, okay, based on this new information that emitted the first time, now it's there. If it's not defensible, as soon as someone questions you, your whole argument's going to fall down like a deck of cards.
But a lot of times, even the defense of the data isn't justified. So the defense of the data comes from a false pretense.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
And so
it needs to come from a truthful pretense.
Well, and we're not talking about sources, folks. I think let's nail that down, that it's not about who do you source the data from. It's about, is the data reliable? Meaning, are you referencing a data that on Tuesday you say it's unreliable because it goes against your narrative, but then on Thursday you go, it's extremely reliable because it supports your narrative? Because then you're picking and choosing the data in your research report, and that has none of it. If we look at 2020, right? If we look at this year, as crazy as this year has been, let me take you back before COVID. January of this year, what was the biggest story in the cyber community? Does anyone remember? Citrix.
Oh yeah, Citrix.
People forget it. I know we're COVID, work from home, ransomware, all that good stuff. But people forget Citrix was a huge story in January of this year. We literally kicked off the year with a massive Citrix vulnerability that left organizations exposed with no way to defend themselves, essentially. And people had to do a different workarounds, take systems offline. Like, there was a ton of work that needed to be done there. I mean, this was huge for Citrix. Huge.
It was almost as big as, now you remind me, I'm thinking back to the beginning of the year, and the first thing that came to mind was Tiger King, but that's... It's like when life was simpler back then, wasn't it?
Well, Tiger King became a phenomenon right when the lockdown started, right? Because people were like at home and they're like, what's this Tiger King thing? Joe Exotic, right? And so people went and watched that. But before work from home, before all of that, Citrix was a huge story, was insane. But then people were manipulating the Citrix data, the Citrix headlines to support, if you only did this, or if they only, I can't tell you how many emails I got, right?
Yeah.
Using Citrix, we can help. And I'm like, stop. Okay, block list, right? Like, my spam filters got upgraded within 48 hours.
Yeah. And you get a lot of that. You get a lot of that ambulance chasing going on in the industry, which, I mean, to a degree, it's fine. Salespeople's jobs are there. But when there's a coordinated campaign against it, where someone's put time and effort, it's like British Airways just got fined a record amount. Do you want to be the next British Airways? Well, I'd love to have a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise. Yeah, of course. Why not?
Well, I've got a British Airways 787 right over my head. I don't know if you see that in the background.
Oh yeah, I can now. Yeah, very
Yeah,
cool.
it's right next to Albert Einstein. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, it's funny because the British Airways fine, right? The GDPR fine for British Airways. We were like, what? That's it? And you're like, they shouldn't have been fined to begin with. They shouldn't have been fined to begin with, right? Like, we're punishing victims of crimes again. That's like if you get robbed, right? Someone comes and like steals something from your house, and then a few months later you get a fine from your local council. Goes, hi, Mr. Malik, you need to pay us £1,000, for the investigation cost. Yeah, we know you're a victim of a crime. Yes, you didn't really lock your window, but it's your fault you didn't lock the window, and so we're going to charge you police work time, which is £1,000.
Yeah. There's so much of that, but I think that's a completely whole rabbit hole we could go down.
That is a whole rabbit hole we can go down. So going back to surveys and research, we look at surveys, and like I said, we try to go down this rabbit hole of the data points that you're using, who you're surveying, who you're speaking with, and then how you're taking that data, and then you try to manipulate the data to a narrative. But what's the right approach to this, right? Like what should be the gold standard of how you put together a good research based on surveys?
So I think, don't limit yourself just to surveys is what I'd say. Surveys only form a really small snapshot. So always try to supplement it with other sources. So even if it's looking at system data or data from publicly available data, like lists of breaches that are publicly, like that being fines or whatever, I think the more data you can add to it to add context, adds more light on it, and it gives you different options. I think the conclusions that you drive, they need to be sort of like relevant to the actual data that you're talking about. And this is where I think a lot of people go wrong. They try to pull out conclusions that aren't relevant to the data. So you have a lot of spurious correlations. I don't know if you've seen the website by Tyler Vision, and it's like there's lots of false correlations being made. So the number of deaths in a swimming pool correlate almost exactly to the number of movies Nicolas Cage appears in any given year. So the more movies that Nicolas Cage has appeared in a year, the more people die from drowning in a swimming pool. And this is what we really need to avoid. Just because BA got fined so much, because it doesn't mean that if you have the exact same vulnerability, or if you're doing the exact same thing, you're going to be breached in the same way and you're going to be fined in the same way, and extrapolate that across the world and say, okay, now this is a $10 billion global problem, because it's not. It's just a one-off in that way. So the conclusions really need to justify what the findings are, and then also that you need to provide some guidance to the reader other than buy our stuff. If your whole conclusion boils down to buy our stuff or hire our consultants, or we're all doomed, then that is just no use to anyone at all. They want to say, okay, this is great, but it's like it sometimes feels a bit like a Tarantino movie where it's really interesting, and then you get to the end and you're like, well, what do I do now? Is that the end, really? Because
in a Tarantino movie, either everyone dies.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh, that's the end, but that was actually the middle of the film, and so, but it's you need to give people something tangible to and useful to do it, because if we take it back one step, the objective of research, and to use the oft-used phrase, it's thought leadership. You're effectively giving people something that's very useful to them in order to build trust. And that's proper research. If you're trying to present something in a way just to say, this is a problem, buy our product, you're only doing really poor marketing.
Well, and a lot of times the research, I will say this, that in a predominant amount of organizations, the research is done by the marketing department and not by the cyber professionals, where the marketing department actually goes in and does the survey. And, I don't know a lot of good cyber marketing people. I know a handful of them, but there's an issue with that, because the cyber people, when they come in and try to fix it, they're not even given the ability to do so.
Yeah, exactly. And those questions as well, like, to the survey questions, open-ended questions are kind of better because you allow the respondent to add a lot of flavor to it, but they're harder because they don't scale as well. You can't take 100. So a lot of the surveys end up being yes or no or what have you.
Or ranking 1 to 5, or
ranking 1 to,
or
exactly.
From not important at all to very important, critical.
Exactly. And in that, the wording really makes a big difference, because oftentimes, especially when it's written by marketing teams, they're injecting their own bias into it. So they almost turn into leading questions. So, how unhappy are you with your current firewall provider? And the scale almost goes from a little bit unhappy to extremely unhappy. So they will then come up with, well, everyone is unhappy with their current firewall provider. So avoiding those kinds of leading questions and introducing those biases is very, very important.
I think there's an inherent use of being able to not only ask the right questions, but also, having some level of standard within what qualifies as a real research paper to what qualifies as a pretend white paper to try to get you to buy something. So I want to say this right now: if you're selling something in your research report, call it a white paper.
That's fantastic. It's simple
enough. I know it's a white paper. I know what I'm reading is something that has to do with the fact that you want to sell me something. You want to talk about the use cases of it. I take the data at what it is. You've surveyed 10 of your customers. 8 of them said they love your product and that's their use case. And you're going, hey, this is great for me. It's going to help me sell more. And I put it out there. Don't disguise white papers as research. I think a lot of times I read it and I see research, and then I'm reading it and I'm like, this is a white paper. It's not research. A research has a specific structure to it. It has a history of a problem. It has a bunch of different things that go into there. And then it's got a control group. It has how the control group was managed, the different parts of the control group, and then kind of, the question and response side of it, whether it be a multiple choice, yes, no, right, 1 to 5, so forth. And then kind of a little bit of the conclusions with some quotes from the control group that lets you know why, someone ranked it 1 and why this guy ranked it 5. Well, I ranked it 5 because I work in an organization that does $50 billion a year in revenue. Our cyber budget is $900 million a year, whatever. And, we don't have any shortage of capabilities. Well, this guy ranked it 1 because he goes, I work in an organization that does $150 million a year. Our cyber budget is just under $1 million. And we have to stretch every dollar, and this solution isn't as convenient for us.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, both are good for your research paper, folks. Both are great for your research paper.
Absolutely right. I think one thing that, and even security professionals fall into this trap where they feel like they need to provide the absolute answer at the end. And sometimes that's not the way to look at it. Sometimes it's, you're shining a very bright spotlight on the challenge, and you've made some progress towards coming to the conclusion, but even your conclusion can say, I'm not entirely sure what this means. In the sense that you start the discussion at that point.
And I think that's a brilliant way to get people to engage with your brand. I mean, if you're in marketing, leaving it as an open conclusion and challenging people to join a Q&A webinar and do all these different things are probably going to help your brand seem more of a thought leader, are probably going to support your mission. And it's probably going to engage more people because it will be something that people discuss, disagree on, and agree on. And there's no right or wrong in security. Like, I love that, we started talking about the echo chamber of security and why I don't go to cyber events, because people argue over semantics. And it's just like, there's no right or wrong in security, folks. There's no right or wrong in security. There's what's right for me based on what my company is doing and what my security program can do versus my budget, my resources, and so forth. There's no right or wrong, right? There's no one way is, there's no one way is the right way and this way is the wrong way. The path in cyber is like a hiking trail, right? Everyone kind of, an unmarked hiking trail has break aparts and paths that you go, why would someone go that way? And you go, well, that's not the right way to do it. For who? Based on what? Maybe for that person, that was the right path to travel down, even if it was harder, but because of the way things are, that was the right fit for him.
Absolutely. And this is it. It's, you have to, and so I think, like, not speaking at cyber events is a fantastic approach, and going to these non-cyber events to discuss security, absolutely great. I do think, though, I think if people do want to present at cyber events, that's great, fantastic. But think about the topic that you're presenting, and is it helping the industry move forward, or are you just bragging about how you just owned a box?
Right.
Because even like how we spoke about in the beginning about the skills shortage, and you were like, well, there's a lack of security people who can become effective managers. Well, if you've been a security manager for a long time, come to a cyber event and talk about what being a security manager has taught you, how others can become good security managers. I think that's a talk I would personally be more interested in than someone saying how they owned another IoT device.
Yeah. I will say this, this year's Black Hat, I attended about 5 or 6 different talks. One of them was our good friend, Roger Grimes. I can't miss a Roger talk. No. Roger rarely disappoints. But I went to a few where I left after 10 minutes because I saw the PowerPoint. I saw how the presentation started to roll, and I was just like, yeah, I'm going to reclaim my time on this one. Point of privilege. I'm reclaiming my time. And I'm either going to go to a different talk if I can, or I'm just going to go back to working. And the good talks in Black Hat this year were the talks that weren't around a problem, but they were around a challenge that people were facing. Because I think when you look at the different challenges that people face, the massive transition to the cloud simultaneously because of work from home, the idea of the changing of endpoints and networks, the redefinition of a network, right? Network was defined as being a building, a floor in a building, in an office. Now network has become the computer of someone on their home Wi-Fi where their kids are, their husband, their wives, their so forth, their partners, their roommates, you name it, are all on that same network where the exposure is greater, the risk increases and goes through the roof. And most people don't even want to qualify or validate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it just reminded me of this old anecdote that someone told me. And this ties in with the... We're jumping around topics a bit. I apologize.
No, it's okay. I mean, that's the whole point of this. This is a conversation podcast. This is not an interview. This is a conversation between two people. And I think our audience will appreciate the fact that we're covering a lot of different topics for them.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about the echo chamber of cyber, and it's really wide. This is a wide net.
It is. And I love this story absolutely to bits. It's related to the Department of No and how we interact with people and what have you. So there was this guy. This is going back to the early 2000s, when before the iPhone was out, so it might have been even late 90s, when Blackberries were the only means of mobile emails, and only the execs had it. All the
Mm-hmm.
exec team and some of the senior managers had Blackberries. And my friend of mine, he went to see the head of IT, and on his desk he had a row of Blackberries, and each one was labeled with the name of an exec. And he says to him, "What's this?" And he goes, "These are up to date, running full time backups of every exec's BlackBerry." And he's like, "Why have you got that?" He goes, "If the exec drops his BlackBerry, breaks it, if he forgets it in a taxi, or forgets it in a taxi, or whatever, drops it down into the water, we can remotely wipe it, and within 15 minutes, I can give them a BlackBerry back in their hand, and they're up and running." And for them, I become their hero, their savior in their time of need, and the person that understands what's important to them, that they can replace their BlackBerry within 15 minutes or whatever of it going. And he goes, the benefit of that is that when it comes to annual budget meetings or anything, when I ask for something, they're on board. They're like, "This guy does not waste our money. He knows how to prioritize things, and I get a lot of what I want and what I need." And I love that story so much, because it's just about understanding what's important to the business. It's about speaking their language, and putting aside the fact that he's got live running backups of everyone's emails. But I mean, the thing is, he could access that from the system anyway. But that's something we don't. A lot of security professionals don't consider. It's like, what is the BlackBerry that your execs want? And it's not often you being able to secure the system to the nth degree. It's something else.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I've challenged people to do a backup restore survey. How many companies have active backups that are on a different network? And let's have a backup restore survey, a backup restore conversation. I think that's in the era of ransomware, that is a very, very valid conversation. How do you backup restore? And I asked a group of people on LinkedIn, how many of you guys have an active backup restore that's done daily, weekly, monthly, and so forth? And it was very interesting to see the answers in the comments, because the answers in the comments were, we do it monthly. Some people say we do it weekly. And so then the discussion point at that point becomes, can your business survive on a monthly backup? Meaning, if you're breached a day before your next monthly backup, are you okay with losing 29 days worth of data? Valid question.
Absolutely valid question. Absolutely.
One to be debated, folks. One to be debated.
A good friend of mine, Raj Samani, who's over at McAfee. He's a European CTO, and I saw his talk once, and he asked the audience, and he often asks this question. He goes, "Let's forget about the enterprise for a moment. Who can tell me how many IP connected devices they have just in their home? And who can tell me how much storage in total you have in your home?" So, your phones, your laptops, your tablets, your PlayStations, your Xbox, your TV, your smart devices, everything. And, I think, maybe a couple of hands will go up, and they're from people from, highly technical backgrounds who maintain their own infrastructure at home to a high degree. But a lot of people, they just don't know the answer off the top of their heads. So I think the complexity issue is also one there, that first you need to ask the question for it to dawn on people how screwed or how screwed they are. Yeah, like, some are more than others. And then it's like, well, how do you put your arms around that, and how do you start solving it?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That is Raj brings up a very good point, which is, how can you run your enterprise if you don't know what's at home? Most people forget that they bring their work home, and then they're interconnecting at home. I'm moving, and one of my aspects of moving is, we're looking to buy new appliances, and my wife's hell-bent on a smart fridge. And so I've started researching ways to secure and isolate my smart fridge from the rest of my house.
What exactly does a smart fridge do?
So it's actually, you'd be really amazed at the technology. So a lot of the smart fridges today have a camera inside. So when you're at the grocery store, you can actually launch the app and you go, do I have milk? And then you can see if you've got milk in your fridge, or do I have enough eggs, or what fruits and vegetables do I have in my fridge? So it gives you kind of like a view of everything in your fridge. And it's got a whiteboard on it. So meaning I can, on the whiteboard, on the digital whiteboard on the fridge, I can write the stuff that we're missing, and I don't even have to send the note. My wife or I can access the app when we're at the grocery store, and we can see the list of all the things to buy.
Wow.
The other very interesting aspect of it is the new design. So they've designed it to where you don't have to open your entire fridge to grab a bottled water or a can of Coke. They've made it so that you've got an outer door where you can put all your the stuff that you would open the door to just grab, like a jar of pickles, right? You open your entire fridge to grab a jar of pickles so you can eat a pickle or grab a Coke. So they've made an outer door that still keeps the rest of the products in the fridge at the temperature without losing anything, because there's essentially a plastic wall there that keeps, so you're just opening that one part of it. Very energy efficient. The energy efficiency on them is amazing, but they're also interconnected, and the fridge identifies if a product is going bad. Some of them have sensors to let you know, like, hey, your berries are getting mold, get rid of them, right?
Fascinating.
So very advanced stuff. Now they cost $2,000-$3,000. So I'm like, for a fridge, like, I'm old school. Like, I'll buy a $200 fridge. I'm okay with it. It keeps, they do the same exact thing. It keeps my food cold and my frozen's frozen. But you try to identify the amount of data that this fridge takes. I mean, think of all the data I just gave you that this fridge has.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what makes it really, really interesting. And there's this concept, which Wendy Nather, she came up with, it's called the chemistry of data, where manufacturers and people, they just look at individual elements. Like, okay, so a bad guy can tell I've got eggs in my fridge. What difference does that make? And on its own, it's an element, it's inert. But it's all about how you're combining with other inert elements, and suddenly you've got something that's combustible. And this is where we're rapidly heading into that world where, okay, maybe having one smart device isn't a problem, but then you have a second one and a third one, and then you've got smart cameras. And when you take it all together, then you've got something that, well, I know exactly when you're home, when you're not, what allergies you have, how many people live in your household, the best time to break in, all sorts of information.
There's, I think people who have spent very little time on the dark web or in dark web forums will never understand the value of any data. And there's a ton of value in data. And you're right. What you just said right there, if people think that these cyber criminal gangs are in Russia and all they care about is your data, well, or China or Iran or wherever they are, right? Europe, wherever. When they get that data, they're selling it to someone. So they build a profile on you, and then they're going to go to an organized crime in your state or country, and they're going to be like, I can give you a list of 15 homes with the best times to break in, with the amount of valuables they have. I can have you in and out of the house in 3 minutes, but I want $15,000 because you're going to get $150,000 out of this.
Absolutely.
And then it becomes that kind of life. I can take down their alarm system because they're using a smart alarm. We'll take down the alarm system so you can break in, and their alarm system won't even know that you got in the house.
Yeah.
And if people don't think that's a reality, I guarantee you it's not a Hollywood movie. You just wait a little bit and you'll see this stuff really take place.
And you know what the scary thing is, that to a lesser or greater degree, it's already taking place. from an investigative point of view, it's so hard to A, figure out the root cause, and B, tie any of these separate events together. So, as investigators, like detectives or whatever, they're looking at these as, well, 5 different break-ins without realizing the common element.
Right. And that's why I think when people talk about police reform, one of the police reforms we need to do is transition some of our police force to be able to investigate cybercrime and support of federal authorities in the US. Like, for example, in the Netherlands, they have a cyber police force beyond the federal force, beyond the national security force. They have a cyber police force. I think England also has the same. In the UK Cybercrime Center, they have a local police force, so that if you're a victim of any sort of malicious stuff like porn or anything else, you're able to call a local police, and most counties and departments have someone there. And I think it's time that we do that also in the US.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Malik, may you rule over all of cyber for the foreseeable future, my sir.
No. The heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and for this very fascinating conversation, the echo chamber of security, and how we start to make a change. You've given a ton of really good recommendations, a ton of really good points that I hope people will heed and listen to and understand. We're not coming from a judgmental point of view, but rather the point of these podcasts, the point of doing any sort of stuff like this. And you've also got a YouTube show that you and Eric, who was a previous guest on the podcast, do. I'll let you pitch that here in just a minute. Is to have these hard conversations, and to really challenge us to become better as an industry, to really challenge us to step up our game and not stay in the status quo. Industries that stay in the status quo die. Industries that adapt and move forward are industries that succeed, and the companies that do that and lead the way in it become the most successful. And
Absolutely.
so Javvad, tell us a little bit about the Jarek show.
The Jarek Show is a weekly show on YouTube that me and my good colleague Eric Crone put together, where we talk about a couple of the stories from the week and give our own spin on it. It's basically us having banging heads together about what's happening and having a bit of humorous fun in the process, all under the guise of work. So please subscribe to the show. It's called The Jarek Show, and let us know if you have any feedback or any stories you want us to cover.
It's a really fun show, by the way. Like, I watched it after Eric told me about it, and I really enjoyed it. It's a really good show. So a few very good YouTube shows, The Jarek Show and the Cyber Shit Show, with Chris Roberts and Eric and a few of those guys. Really funny YouTube shows for our industry that people should definitely tune in and watch. Javvad, thank you again for coming on the show. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give us 5 stars, share this video. So if you're on YouTube, copy the link, share it on your LinkedIn page, share it on your Twitter page, let people know so they can watch, listen here. Until next week, folks, we'll be back with so much more. But until then, folks, stay cyber safe.